Okay, this is the final reading for the weekend, Gatsby Chapter 6. So you really want to pay attention to illusion versus reality here, and old money and new money, and East egg and West egg. Okay, specifically, Daisy's going to go to a party at Gatsby's. It's going to be the first party she goes to, and pay attention to what her reaction is. Okay, so this is page 97. About this time, this is right after the reunion, remember. About this time, an ambitious young reporter from New York arrived one morning at Gatsby's door and asked him if he had anything to say. Anything to say about what? Inquired Gatsby politely. Why, any statement to give out. It transpired, after a few confused 5 minutes, that the man had heard Gatsby's name around his office in a connection which he either wouldn't reveal or didn't fully understand. This was his day off, and with laudable means praiseworthy, with laudable initiative he had hurried out to see. It was a random shot, and yet the reporter's instinct was right. Gatsby's notoriety, or his fame, spread about by the hundreds who had accepted his hospitality and so become authorities upon his past, had increased all summer until he fell just short of being news. Contemporary legends, such as the underground pipeline to Canada, attached themselves to him. And there was one persistent story that he didn't live in a house at all, but in a boat that looked like a house and was moved secretly up and down Long Island shore. Just why these inventions or rumors were a source of satisfaction to James Gatz of North Dakota isn't easy to say. James Gatz. That was really, or at least legally, his name. He had changed it at the age of 17, and at the specific moment that witnessed the beginning of his career, when he saw Dan Cody's yacht drop anchor over the most insidious or evil or dangerous flat on Lake Superior. It was James Gatz who had been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants, but it was already Jay Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat, pulled out to the Tuolumne, and informed Cody that a wind might catch him and break him up in half an hour. So two things here. The guy, lots of people are talking rumors about him, okay? And Nick says, I don't know why he likes people spreading rumors. They were a source of satisfaction, okay? And we also learn his full name. Now remember, Nick is telling this part to us in kind of a flashback. Remember, he's this narrator. So he's writing all of this, remember, after he has come back from the East. So he's telling us now, okay, this is his real name. Okay? And it says two things. So his real name is James Gatz. He sees this yacht. Remember, the yacht's the expensive boat. And he goes out in a rowboat and tells this captain, or the guy who owns the boat, Dan Cody, that you're getting too close, you're gonna crash, you're gonna, you're too shallow, okay? But as he's rowing out there, he already knew he was going to introduce himself as a totally different person, Jay Gatsby. So he's created an alter ego. This is the middle of page 98. I suppose he'd had the name ready for a long time, even then. His parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as his parents at all. The truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He invented the character. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that, and he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, and meretricious beauty. Now I want you to look up that word, meretricious. Vast is big, vulgar is like gross, disgusting, okay? Basically, he's talking about the money, the business of making money, okay? So, he invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would be likely to invent. And to this conception, he was faithful to the end. Remember, conception is a creation. creation of this other person, this character. Last paragraph on 98. For over a year, he had been beating his way along the south shore of Lake Superior as a clam digger and a salmon fisher, or in any other capacity that brought him food and bed. Okay, so he's very poor, and he's from parents who are poor farmers. Shiftless means they don't do anything. His brown, hardening body lived naturally through the half-fierce, half-lazy work of the bracing days. He knew women early, and since they spoiled him, he became contemptuous of them. Of young virgins because they were ignorant, of the others because they were hysterical about things which in his overwhelming self-absorption he took for granted. Top of page 99. But his heart was in constant turbulent riot. The most grotesque and fantastic conceits are like fantasies or things you're imagining, haunted him in his bed at night, dreams. A universe of ineffable gaudiness spun itself out in his brain, while the clock ticked on the washstand, and the moon, soaked with wet, light his tangled clothes upon the floor. Each night he added to the pattern of his fancies, until drowsiness closed down upon some vivid scene with an oblivious embrace. So he's coming up with all these crazy ideas. For a while, these reveries or daydreams or imaginations provided an outlet for his imagination. They were a satisfactory hint of the unreality of reality, a promise that the rock of the world was founded securely on a fairy's wing. And again, since we're talking about fantasy and reality, that's probably a good quote to look at there. An instinct toward his future glory had led him some months before to the small Lutheran college of St. Olaf's in southern Minnesota. Now this is, right? Okay, so he was, again, Minnesota is up by Lake Superior, okay, by the Great Lakes. So, okay, he says in this paragraph, an instinct towards his future. So maybe I should go to college. So he goes to St. Olaf's. He stayed there 2 weeks, dismayed at its ferocious indifference, nobody cares, to the drums of his destiny, to destiny itself, and despising the janitor's work with which he was to pay his way through. Then he drifted back to Lake Superior, and he was still searching for something to do on the day that Dan Cody's yacht dropped anchor in the shallows along shore. So he tries to go to college, but he thought he was too good to be a janitor to work to pay for college. And when he got there, nobody really, he's like, the real world doesn't understand my dreams. So he was a clam digger, fisherman, basically somebody who was just loafing around trying to find work and a place to eat and sleep, okay? And that's when this Dan Cody guy comes into the shallow water. Last paragraph on 99. Dan Cody was 50 years old then, a product of the Nevada silver fields of the Yukon, of every rush for metal since '75, so the gold rush. The transactions in Montana copper that made him many times a millionaire found him physically robust, but on the verge of soft-mindedness, okay, like not thinking totally correctly. And suspecting this, an infinite number of women tried to separate him from his money, the none too savory ramifications, or results, by which Ella Kay, the newspaper woman, played Madame de Maintenon to his weakness and sent him to the sea in a yacht, were common knowledge to the turgid sub-journalism of 1902. He had been coasting along all too hospitable shores for 5 years when he turned up as James Gats's destiny in Little Girl Bay. Page 100. This is important. To young Gats, resting on his oars and looking up at that railed deck, that yacht represented all the beauty and glamour in the world. I suppose he smiled at Cody. He had probably discovered that people liked him when he smiled. At any rate, Cody asked him a few questions. One of them elicited the brand new name. I'm like, what's your name, kid? J. Gatsby. And Cody found that he was quick and extravagantly ambitious. A few days later, he took him to Duluth and bought him a blue coat, 6 pairs of white duck trousers, and a yachting cap. And when the Tuolumne left for the West Indies and the Barbary Coast, Gatsby left too. He was employed in a vague personal capacity. Gatsby, so Gatsby starts working for this guy on his yacht. While he remained with Cody, he was in turn steward, mate, skipper, secretary, and even jailer. For Dan Cody sober, knew what lavish doings Dan Cody drunk might soon be about, and provided for such contingencies by reposing more and more trust in Gatsby. The arrangement lasted 5 years, during which the boat went 3 times around the continent. It might have lasted indefinitely, except for the fact that Ella Kay came on board one night in Boston, and a week later, Dan Cody inhospitably died. I remember the portrait of him up in Gatsby's bedroom. A gray, florid man with a hard, empty face, the pioneer debauchee, who during one phase of American life brought back to the eastern seaboard the savage violence of the frontier brothel and saloon. It was indirectly due to Cody that Gatsby drank so little. Sometimes in the course of gay parties, women used to rub champagne into his hair. For himself, he formed the habit of letting liquor alone, because Dan Cody was always drunk, so Gatsby decided he didn't want to be like that. And it was from Cody that he inherited money, a legacy of $25,000. He didn't get it. He never understood the legal device that was used against him, but what remained of the millions went intact to Ella Kay. He was left with his singularly appropriate education. The vague contour or shape of J. Gatsby had filled out to the substantiality of a man, top of 101. So Gatsby did inherit money, but he never got it, because this broad that came out in Boston somehow ended up taking all of Dan Cody's money, and Cody, inhospitably died a week later after she came on board. So, you can kind of make the inference that maybe she killed him. I don't know. So now we have a space, and here comes Nick telling us things again. He told me all of this very much later, but I put it down here with the idea of exploding those first wild rumors about his antecedents, his ancestors, which weren't even fairly true. Moreover, he told it to me at a time of confusion, when I had reached the point of believing everything and nothing about him. So I take advantage of this short halt in our story, while Gatsby, so to speak, caught his breath to clear this set of misconceptions away. It was a halt, too, in my association with his affairs. For several weeks I didn't see him or hear his voice on the phone. Mostly I was in New York, trotting around with Jordan and trying to ingratiate myself with her senile aunt. But finally I went over to his house one Sunday afternoon. I hadn't been there 2 minutes when somebody brought Tom Buchanan in for a drink. I was startled, naturally, but the really surprising thing was that it hadn't happened before. They were a party of 3 on horseback, Tom and a man named Sloane, and a pretty woman in a brown riding habit, which is a hat, who had been there previously. "I'm delighted to see you," said Gatsby, standing on his porch. "I'm delighted that you dropped in." As though they cared. These are old money East Egg people, 3 of them on horses who just happened to drop in. "Sit right down. Have a cigarette or a cigar." He walked around the room quickly, ringing bells. "I'll have something to drink for you in just a minute." He was profoundly affected by the fact that Tom was there. But he would be uneasy anyhow until he had given them something, realizing in a vague way that that was all they came for. Mr. Sloane wanted nothing. "A lemonade? No, thanks. A little champagne? Nothing at all, thanks." "I'm sorry." "Did you have a nice ride?" "Very good roads around here." "I suppose the automobiles—" "Yeah." Moved by an irresistible impulse, Gatsby turned to Tom, who had accepted the introduction as a stranger. "I believe we've met somewhere before, Mr. Buchanan." "Oh, yes," said Tom, gruffly polite, but obviously not remembering. "So we did. I remember very well." "About 2 weeks ago." "Oh, that's right. You were with Nick here." "I know your wife," continued Gatsby, almost aggressively. "That's so." Tom turned to me. "You live near here, Nick?" "Next door." "That's so." Mr. Sloane didn't enter into the conversation, but lounged back haughtily, or remember haughty is snobby and condescending, in his chair. The woman said nothing either, until unexpectedly, after 2 highballs, drinks, she became cordial or friendly. "Well, I'll come over to your next party, Mr. Gatsby." She shook She suggested. What do you say? Oh, certainly, I'd be delighted to have you. Be very nice, said Mr. Sloane without gratitude. Well, think ought to be starting home. Oh, please don't hurry, Gatsby urged them. He had control of himself now and wanted to see more of Tom. Why don't you stay for supper? I wouldn't be surprised if some other people dropped in from New York. You come to supper with me, said the lady enthusiastically. Both of you. This included me. Mr. Sloane got to his feet. Come along, he said, but to her only. I mean it, she insisted. I'd love to have you. Lots of room. Gatsby looked at me questioningly. He wanted to go, and he didn't see that Mr. Sloane had determined he shouldn't. I'm afraid I won't be able to, I said. Well, you come, she urged, concentrating on Gatsby. Mr. Sloane murmured something close to her ear. We won't be late if we start now, she insisted aloud. Well, I haven't got a horse, said Gatsby. I used to ride in the army, but I've never bought a horse. I'll have to follow you in my car. Excuse me for just a minute. So she invites him to dinner, but it's kind of like when you invite somebody, like, you really don't want them to go, but you just have to invite them to be polite. Gatsby doesn't understand. Again, he does not understand old money and East egg behaviors, okay? Which is kind of a bad thing, because who is old money? So, it says, right in the middle of 103, the rest of us walked out on the porch where Sloane and the lady began an impassioned conversation aside. Impassioned, they're arguing with each other. My God, I believe the man's coming, said Tom. Doesn't he know she doesn't want him? Well, she says she does want him. Psh, she has a big dinner party and he won't know a soul there. He frowned. I wonder where in the devil he met Daisy. By God, I may be old-fashioned in my ideas, but women run around too much these days to suit me. They meet all kinds of crazy fish, which is really ironic and makes Tom sound even more like a big douchebag, pardon my language, because he's the cheater, right? Just a little bit two-faced. Suddenly, Mr. Sloane and the lady walked down the steps and mounted their horses. Come on, said Mr. Sloane to Tom. We're late. We've got to go. And then to me, tell him we couldn't wait, will you? Tom and I shook hands. The rest of us exchanged a cool nod, and they trotted quickly down the drive, disappearing under the August foliage just as Gatsby, with hat and light overcoat in hand, came out the front door like he really had his things and was ready to go. Tom was evidently perturbed at Daisy running around alone. Top of 104. For on the following Saturday night, he came with her to Gatsby's party. Perhaps his presence gave the evening its peculiar quality of oppressiveness. It stands out in my memory from Gatsby's other parties that summer. There were the same people, or at least the same sort of people, the same profusion of champagne, the same many-colored, many-keyed commotion. But I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Egg as a world complete in itself, with its own standards and its own great figures, second to nothing because it had no consciousness of being so. So he's saying that maybe he got used to West Egg being so crazy and bizarre, but he notices something different about this night. So, and now I was looking at it again, through Daisy's eyes. It is invariably saddening to look through new eyes at things upon which you have expended your own powers of adjustment. They arrived at twilight, and as we strolled out among the sparkling hundreds, Daisy's voice was playing murmurous tricks in her throat. These things excite me so, she whispered. If you want to kiss me any time during the evening, Nick, just let me know and I'll be glad to arrange it for you. Just mention my name or present a green card. I'm giving out green... Look around, suggested Gatsby. I'm looking around. I'm having a marvelous... You must see the faces of many people you've heard about. Tom's arrogant eyes roamed the crowd. Yeah, we don't go around very much, he said. In fact, I was just thinking I don't know a soul here. Well, perhaps you know that lady. Gatsby indicated a gorgeous, scarcely human orchid of a woman who sat in state under a white plum tree. Tom and Daisy stared, with that peculiarly unreal feeling that accompanies the recognition of a hitherto ghostly celebrity of the movies. She's lovely, said Daisy. The man bending over her is her director. He took them ceremoniously from group to group. Mrs. Buchanan and Mr. Buchanan. After an instant's hesitation, he added, the polo player. Oh no, objected Tom quickly. Not me. But evidently the sound of it pleased Gatsby, for Tom remained the polo player for the rest of the evening. I've never met so many celebrities, Daisy exclaimed. I like that man. What was his name? With the sort of blue nose? Gatsby identified him, adding that he was a small producer. Well, I liked him anyhow. I'd a little rather not be the polo player, said Tom pleasantly. I'd rather look at all these famous people in oblivion. Like I don't really even care who they are, right? Daisy and Gatsby danced. I remembered being surprised by his graceful, conservative foxtrot, which is a dance. I had never seen him dance before. Then they sauntered over to my house and sat on the steps for half an hour, while at her request I remained watchfully in the garden, like the lookout. In case there's a fire or flood, she explained, or any act of God. Basically, he's watching out for Tom. Tom appeared from his oblivion as we were sitting down to supper together. Do you mind if I meet with some people over here? He said. Fellow's getting off some funny stuff. Oh, go ahead, answered Daisy genially, and if you want to take down any addresses, here's my little gold pencil. She looked around after a moment and told me the girl was common but pretty. Okay, so she's referring to here, why don't you have my pencil in case you want to get some digits of some chicks here, right? So, and then she says the girl that he's talking about was common but pretty. And I knew that except for the half hour she'd been alone with Gatsby, she wasn't having a good time. We were at a particularly tipsy table. That was my fault. Gatsby had been called to the phone, and I'd enjoyed these same people only 2 weeks before. But what had amused me then turned septic on the air now. Septic, right? Toxic. Just not good. How do you feel, Miss Baedeker? The girl addressed was trying unsuccessfully to slump against my shoulder. Ugh. And I am unsuccessfully readjusting. Okay. Excuse me. 106. The girl addressed was trying unsuccessfully to slump against my shoulder, right? Like this, okay? At this inquiry, she sat up and opened her eyes. What? A massive and lethargic woman. Lethargic means you're not moving, right? Who had been urging Daisy to play golf with her at the local club tomorrow, spoke in Miss Baedeker's offense. Oh, she's all right now. When she's had 5 or 6 cocktails, she always starts screaming like that. I tell her she ought to leave it alone. I do leave it alone, affirmed the accused hollowly. We heard you yelling, so I said to Doc Civet here, there's somebody that needs your help, Doc. She's much obliged, I'm sure, said another friend without gratitude. But you got her dress all wet when you stuck her head in the pool. Anything I hate is to get my head stuck in a pool, mumbled Miss Baedeker. They almost drowned me once over in New Jersey. Then you ought to leave it alone, countered Dr. Civet. Speak for yourself, cried Miss Baedeker violently. Your hand shakes. I wouldn't let you operate on me. And it was like that. Almost the last thing I remember was standing with Daisy and watching the movie picture director and his star. So they're sitting down to this scene with all these people who are just being a total bunch of violent, nonsensical drunks. Top of 107. They were still under the white plum tree, and their faces, the movie director and the star, were touching, except for a pale, thin ray of moonlight between. It occurred to me that he had been very slowly bending toward her all evening to attain this proximity or closeness, and even while I watched, I saw him stoop one ultimate degree and kiss at her cheek. I like her, said Daisy. I think she's lovely. But the rest offended her, and inarguably, because it wasn't a gesture, but an emotion. She was appalled or disgusted by West Egg, this unprecedented place that Broadway had begotten upon a Long Island fishing village, appalled by its raw vigor or life that chafed or scratched under the old euphemisms, and by the too obtrusive fate that herded its inhabitants along a shortcut from nothing to nothing. She saw something awful in the very simplicity that she failed to understand. So she does not understand West Egg and was appalled by the way the people behaved. I sat on the front steps with them while they waited for their car. It was dark here in front. Only the bright door sent 10 square feet of light volleying out from the soft black morning. Sometimes a shadow moved against the dressing room blind above, gave way to another shadow, an indefinite procession of shadows that rogued and powdered in invisible glass. "Who is this Gatsby, anyhow?" demanded Tom suddenly. "Some big bootlegger?" "Where did you hear that?" I inquired. "I didn't hear it. I imagined it. A lot of these newly rich people are just big bootleggers, "Not Gatsby," I said shortly. He was silent for a moment. The pebbles of the drive crunched under his feet, so they're waiting for their limo, or their car. "Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together." A menagerie is a group of animals, okay? So there's animal imagery again. Top of 108. A breeze stirred the gray haze of Daisy's fur collar. "At least they're more interesting than the people that we know," she said with an effort. "Psh, you didn't look so interested." "Well, I was." Tom laughed and turned to me. "Did you notice Daisy's face when that girl asked her to put her under a cold shower?" Daisy began to sing with the music in a husky rhythmic whisper, bringing out a meaning in each word that it had never had before and would never have again. When the melody rose, her voice broke up sweetly, following it in a way contralto voices have, and each change tipped out a little of her warm human magic upon the air. "Lots of people come who haven't been invited," she said suddenly. "That girl hadn't been invited. They simply forced their way in, and he's too polite to object." "Well, I'd like to know who he is and what he does," insisted Tom, "and I think I'll make a point of finding out." "I can tell you right now," she answered. "He owns some drugstores, a lot of drugstores. He built them up himself. Okay, we're talking like Walgreens, pharmacies." The dilatory or late limousine came rolling up the drive. "Good night, Nick," said Daisy. Her glance left me and sought the lighted top of the steps where 3 o'clock in the morning, a neat and sad little waltz of that year, that's a song, was drifting out the open door. After all, in the very casualness of Gatsby's party, there were romantic possibilities totally absent from her world. What was it up there in the song that seemed to be calling her back inside? What would happen now in the dim, incalculable hours? Perhaps some unbelievable guest would arrive, a person infinitely rare and to be marveled at, some authentically radiant young girl who with one fresh glance at Gatsby, one moment of magical encounter, would blot out those 5 years of unwavering devotion. I stayed late that night, on 109. Gatsby asked me to wait until he was free, and I lingered in the garden until the inevitable swimming party had run up, chilled and exalted from the black beach, until the lights were extinguished in the guest rooms overhead. When he came down the steps at last, the tan skin was drawn unusually tight on his face, and his eyes were bright and tired. "She didn't like it," he said immediately. "Of course she did." "She didn't like it," he insisted. "She didn't have a good time." He was silent, and I guessed at his unutterable depression. "I feel far away from her," he said. "It's hard to make her understand." "You mean about the dance?" "The dance?" He dismissed all the dances he had given with the snap of his fingers. "Old sport, the dance is unimportant." He wanted nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, "I never loved you." After she had obliterated 4 years with that sentence, they could decide upon the more practical measures to be taken. One of them was that after she was free, they were to go back to Louisville and be married from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago. So he basically says what he wants is for Daisy to say she never loved Tom. And he wants to turn back the clock, to repeat the past, to make everything just as it were, he says. "And she doesn't understand," he said. "She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours." He broke off and began to walk up and down a desolate path of fruit rinds and discarded favors and crushed flowers. Top of page 110. "I wouldn't ask too much of her," I ventured. "You can't repeat the past." "Can't repeat the past?" he cried incredulously. "Why, of course you can." He looked around him wildly, as if the past were lurking here in the shadow of his house, just out of reach of his hand. "I'm going to fix everything just the way it was before. he said, nodding determinedly. She'll see. He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then, but if he could once return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. So now we've got some ... okay? So we know that he wants to repeat the past, go back, okay? So now you're hearing Nick, where these dots start. Nick is remembering Gatsby telling him about the first time that he and Daisy kissed, okay, about their first kiss. One autumn night, 5 years before, they had been walking down the street when the leaves were falling, and they came to a place where there were no trees and the sidewalk was white with moonlight. They stopped here and turned toward each other. Now it was a cool night, with that mysterious excitement in it which comes at the two changes of the year. The quiet lights in the houses were humming out into the darkness, and there was a stir and bustle among the stars. Out of the corner of his eye, Gatsby saw that the blocks of the sidewalks really formed a ladder and mounted to a secret place above the trees. He could climb to it, if he climbed alone, and once there, he could suck on the pap of life, gulp down the incomparable milk of wonder. His heart beat faster and faster as Daisy's white face came up to his own. He knew that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon the star. Then he kissed her. At his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. So in that kiss, okay, where he says, at his lips' touch, she blossomed for him like a flower, and the incarnation was complete. Okay, in that kiss, Gatsby's dreams of success, remember he had all those dreams before he even met her, and that's why it said his mind would never romp again. All of those dreams of success became focused on Daisy. Okay, she became almost idealized, this ideal dream for Gatsby, and basically the center of his life. So everything that he has done has been for her instead of being successful for himself. Does that make sense? Through all he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, okay, and Nick is kind of like, this is disgusting. I can't believe that he's actually telling me about all this and that this dude is so obsessed. I was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth, and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there was more struggling upon them than a wisp of startled air. But they made no sound, and what I had almost remembered was uncommunicable forever. And that is where our chapter 6 ends.